Hello and welcome to the third in our Evolve series of live stream expert panel discussions. My name is Des Blanchfield. Thank you so much for joining us. I will be your host and moderator for today's event. I'm joined by two fantastic subject matter experts I'll invite to introduce themselves in a moment. But before we do that, just a little bit of housekeeping. We would love you to participate in the conversation via the chat window at any time. Anytime we're going through the conversation, either through the market update or through the Q&A, the panel discussion, please do put your questions forward in the chat window. We will integrate them as much as we can through the hour to keep the interactive element going through the conversation. So you're not just listening, but participating in that conversation. Any that we cannot get to during the discussion part of the panel, we will definitely bring at the end in the Q&A. And if we miss any for any reason due to time constraints, we will obviously follow up via email. You can also follow along via the #Evolve hashtag on Twitter. By all means, post questions on there. And we would really love you to follow the AWS and HPE and HPE APAC handles on LinkedIn and Twitter as well to continue the conversation beyond. So today's discussion is all around containers and particularly containers in the enterprise environment, and specifically on the AWS ECS platform, which we'll delve into a few moments. We're going to be looking at enterprise containers in the cloud specifically. We're going to be looking at the business challenges and business opportunities. We're going to be talking about containers in general and what they are and how and where to apply them for enterprise solutions. We're going to be looking at where businesses can gain value from the use of containers and when the right time is to deploy them. We're finding now a lot of software is coming bundled, expecting an environment to deploy containerized packaged software. We're then going to look at the technology solution and fit, and specifically how and where to incorporate containers in your enterprise solutions with the AWS ECS solution and where the HPE team can help you in that journey. And then we're going to investigate the journey from trials and deployment through to full operational status. Often there's a number of challenges where if your core business is not being an IT shop, or if you don't have the skills and resources internally, you may succeed in doing some trials and deployments, but you may not have all the resources internally to support the full operational needs that your organization has to keep the technology running. When if you're a bank, you want to be a bank, or if you're an airline, you want to be an airline, and you don't necessarily want to be an IT shop running complex container environments with enterprise software in the cloud. And this is where HPE and AWS can help you. So we were looking at where to get started with containerized solutions for enterprise, and particularly in the cloud, as I said. And we'll be looking at how HPE APAC and AWS can help your organization achieve those successful outcomes and overcome some of the challenges through those stages of the journey. But before I go any further, let me introduce our amazing panel. We're joined today by two experts from HPE and AWS, as I said. So firstly, Cameron Sinnes, joining us from Melbourne, I believe. You're the regional lead for Container Services Business Unit at Amazon Web Services. Welcome, great to have you here. Thanks for making time to join us.
Thanks so much, Des. Great to be with you here today, and Harris, of course, also. Yeah.
And Harris Schneiderman, you're a regular on the show. Thank you so much for joining us again from Melbourne. Harris is the Enterprise Sales Director for the Hybrid Cloud practice for HPE APAC. Great to see you, Harris. Thanks again for joining us. Appreciate you making time.
Great to see you again, Des. A real pleasure.
And Happy New Year to both of you. Now, before we go into the actual panel discussion, as we always do, we look to one of our panelists to provide us a bit of a market update. And today, Harris, we'd love you to do that for us. Harris is going to provide us a brief market update on a number of key things, themes, topics, and so forth he's seen across the market and through the APAC region and globally, and specifically around containers, of course, with the focus on enterprise solutions. So Harris, I wonder if I could pass over to you now before we get into our panel discussion. Just give us a little bit of a market update on what you're seeing out there and some of the things you've seen, particularly in the context of the year 2021 and what we could look forward to in 2022. And then we'll kick off in our panel discussion.
Oh, my pleasure, Des. Thank you very much. So I guess to start things off, it's probably no surprise to anyone that the last 2 years, because of COVID, has accelerated the adoption of containers, right? Much like, COVID has forced many enterprises to accelerate their digital transformation, right? And containers are a key part of that. So that's been the story for the last few years. And, I expect that's going to continue. It's hard to predict the future that COVID will take, but I think that this is a trend that's going to persist, regardless of the outcome of what's going on with the virus. But I think it's a good opportunity, now that we're, a couple of years in, maybe I can share some data to give you a sense of how far we've come and, where I think the market is heading. So, the first way to look at this is to think about, how broadly have applications become containerized? How much has this become a mainstream way of deploying and making applications available? Forrester has some interesting data on this, and according to them, 10% of all applications globally have been containerized. And that's a pretty good result. That means that the technology is starting to take hold. We've seen some progress, obviously, and I expect that that's going to continue. That number is going to go higher. So that's looking at the portfolio of apps that exist out there. But another way to look at it is how broadly it's been adopted within companies. So if you look at some of the data from Gartner, about 36% of organizations have deployed containers in some fashion today. So, about a third of organizations. But over the next 3 years, Gartner forecasts that this number is going to increase to 85%. So they are expecting, those adoption numbers to grow, and this is going to become a mainstream majority technology in the next 3 years. And that's pretty consistent with what I've seen as well. There's a lot of interest and a lot of rapid growth in this space, which is great to see. Another thing to look at, particularly given the guests that we have today, is where are people running these containers, right? So at the moment, according to the data that I've seen, about 60% of the total revenue for containers, not necessarily instances, but revenue, 60% is coming from on-prem workloads today, right? And that's reflects, I think, where the market is. But what we're also seeing, not surprisingly, is that container platforms that run in the cloud are the fastest growing segment of this market, with 30%, compound annual growth, year on year. And so, anything growing at that rate is gonna ramp up that adoption very, very quickly. So we see the big opportunities around containers in the cloud, and that's really where my team is spends a lot of our time. And then if you look at that on a regional basis, not surprisingly, APAC is the fastest growing region to adopt containers with a compound growth rate of 33% year on year. So that's pretty exciting. It's a great place to be. I'm very proud that I work in this region, and exciting to have a partner like AWS with us here today. So yeah, that's kind of my view today, Des. I'm kind of curious about your observations in this space. How are containers being used in enterprise environments, and what are you seeing?
Yeah, thanks. So, there's an interesting couple of things that really jumped out. I think over the last 5 or 6 years, the idea of the shift to a DevOps model for internally developed code and internally developed environments gained a lot of traction, but it took a little while, as the general concept of cloud did, I guess. Not so much SaaS, but certainly infrastructure as a service took, for people to realize that software was going to come to them pre-packaged in, I guess, a format that required an environment to run containers. And not necessarily the full complexity of Kubernetes, but definitely an environment that can run containers. And we're seeing that now with a lot of software that even runs on laptops and desktops. And there are a couple of things that really jumped out last year in particular in that context of organizations maybe being a little bit on the back foot, obviously with the pandemic impacting them in every possible way it could, maybe not geared up fully for containerized solutions. They may have been doing some development and refactoring internally of their own code and looked for a DevOps capability there. But when enterprise software came pre-packaged, expecting an environment to run as a containerized solution, I think that caught them out. And in many ways, that makes sense, because if you're a bank or an airline or a transport, logistics, education, or even a government department styled organization, you're not necessarily an IT shop. Your core business is not about running containerized solutions. And you may or may not have the skills and resource internally to do that in a cloud environment, such as AWS ECS. So I think that was one of the big things that really jumped out at me last year, that organizations were caught out a little, not necessarily a negative thing, though, just an awareness they came to was like, oh, we don't have the skills, the resources. What partner of choice can we look to? The second element was just around the challenge that when they did get to a point where they'd done some trials and deployments of maybe new software and upgrade, in many cases, an environment that used to run on-premise and hardware, or maybe it was just straight out bare bones infrastructure service on a VM in the cloud environment like AWS. When it came containerized, the upgrade wasn't just a VM to a VM or hardware to hardware. It was potentially infrastructure as a service to cloud environment, and that caught them out. And that transition to operational status, that was something that often they hadn't had a lot of experience with. So there are two things that really, really jumped out at me, that organizations kind of needed to look to partners like HPE APAC and AWS to say, we don't really have the skills and resources, we don't have the experience, and more importantly, how do we run this in an operational status going forward?
Well, that's great, Des. Thanks for your insight on that. And I think just to kind of close the market update, I thought it makes sense to talk a little bit about security. So, the other, big trend in COVID, which doesn't get talked a lot about, people always talk about supply chain bottlenecks and worker shortages and things like that. But the thing that doesn't get as much headline, but I think is critically important, is the dramatic increase in cyber attacks during COVID. And the reason for that, if you think about it, is most organizations have designed their enterprise security around this concept that, most of the workers work inside the company, they're behind the firewall, and the security is geared around that. And there's a small minority of people that work remotely. Well, obviously that model's been turned on its head. Almost everyone is working remotely. And that means that a lot of the investments in enterprise security are not really effective anymore. And hackers are taking advantage of that. We've seen a over 400% increase in cyber attacks since the start of COVID. And, containerized environments are, part of that mix that, they're trying to compromise in some way. And so therefore, what we're seeing is that organizations are responding to this threat, and that's driving increasing investment in container security. And what we're seeing is that the container security market is expected to grow 29%, year on year, for the next 9 years, right? Which again, that's phenomenal growth, over the next decade. But then even more interesting is that we're also seeing a forecasted increase in this concept of container as a service. That's expected to grow 30% year on year. And I think that really speaks to the point that you were just making, Des, about, there's an interest in containers. Organizations don't necessarily have the skills, and so they're looking for solutions that they can simply deploy, something that they can get as a service rather than having to worry about the complexities of infrastructure and standing it up. And I think that's great. Speaking as someone from HPE and our partnership with AWS, this aligns directly with our strategy about how do we make the container environment and the container infrastructure as easy as possible for customers to use, but in a secure fashion.
Indeed, and I think that's a natural evolution we've seen through any digital transformation, whether it was outsourcing to data center environments, third-party hosted environments. There was some security challenges that need to be addressed there, and policy changes and governance and controls. Definitely, when we started with the early adoption of SaaS and then infrastructure service, there were some interesting learnings from that. And containers are going to go through the same evolutionary process, that new things often introduce little gaps that wary hackers are going to make it, take advantage of. There's no opportunity that a hacker won't take advantage of, and the pandemic is certainly no exception to that. Well, thanks, Harris. I really appreciate you providing the market update on that. And I think there's a lot of key things to be taken away from that, which we'll talk about in the next 30 to 40 minutes in our panel discussion now. So let me just reintroduce you both and get you to do a little bit of a summary around your role, and I guess more specifically how your role has changed over the last couple of years. So Harris, let's just stay with you for a moment. You're the Enterprise Sales Director for the Hybrid Cloud practice of HPE APAC. I wonder if you could maybe just briefly share an overview of your role and what it entails and what the core focus areas are. And then also just give us a summary of some of the observations and experience you've had in the last 2 years in the context of your role and how the pandemic has changed that role.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Des. Well, I work for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, and I think everyone knows that Hewlett-Packard Enterprise is a company that makes fantastic, compute, storage, and network hardware, and has done so for many, many years, and will continue to do so. But we also do a lot in the professional services space. We have an organization called PointNext, which provides all of our professional services end to end. I think most people know, obviously, that's professional services for HPE's great equipment, but we also do professional services far beyond that. And my practice, the hybrid cloud practice, is focused on helping customers at every stage of their transformation to adopt cloud technology. That can be everything from helping an organization develop a strategy and a roadmap, to assessing their current environment, helping them come up with a concrete plan around how they can adopt and incorporate cloud. We can help with migrations, and we can provide ongoing managed services. So we can help any customer at any stage of that life cycle from a services standpoint. And the core platforms that we work on are AWS and also containers, the topic of today's conversation. So that's why I'm really excited to be here. We see this as an important area of growth, and I think that the market update that I just gave bears that out. And so, I think that's really exciting, and that's something that really gets me up every day. Now, in terms of how the roles change, professional services, have been around for a long time. That's nothing new. Technology is somewhat new, but even though we're operating in a really new area, such as public cloud and containers, and even though pretty much all of that work can be done remotely, prior to COVID, we were still delivering engagements with customers in the traditional fashion. We'd fly a consultant to their office, they'd get a desk there, they'd get a laptop, they'd work on site with that customer until the project was concluded, right? That's the way that we operated. And that's not because we thought that that was the right model, but that's just the way the industry has worked. And, many customers are of the view that they like to see their consultants and have them there. And then, of course, COVID came and we all said, oh my God, offices are closed. Our clients were really concerned, like, how are we going to proceed with these projects? And what we said to them was, look, just because we've always done things this way doesn't mean they have to be done that way. When HPE saw that COVID was going to be an issue, we had to come up with our own plans around how we would run our business remotely. And we've taken those learnings and applied them to how we work with clients today. So we're delivering the same quality of work and delivering fantastic outcomes, but we're now doing it all virtually. And, I think that's, both a testament to how the platforms like AWS have matured to enable that to be possible, but also how our teams responded and not said, we can't do this, but rather we've been asking the question, how can we get this done and how can we continue to take care of our clients?
Right. Yeah, they're good points. Cameron, let me bring you in now. Thank you for patiently waiting. Cameron Senes is the regional lead for Container Services Business Unit at Amazon Web Services. Great to have you. Thanks so much for making time to join us. I wonder if you could kick us off with a brief introduction of yourself and your role, some of the key things that your role entails, and I guess some of the focus areas you have currently, all things given, and similarly how the pandemic has impacted your role and I guess your business unit overall and some of your customers.
Wonderful. Again, firstly, Des, thanks again. It's a real pleasure to be here with you and Harris today. So as he stated, I lead the container services business in Australia and New Zealand for AWS. And interestingly, my role's comprised of a number of moving parts, but probably in its simplest form could be summarized as providing an in-region extension of the service teams that create our portfolio of container services. So serving as the service line's primary interface to the regional field, marketing, professional services, partners, ISVs, and of course our customers. So wrapped up there, the role encompasses quite a broad range of activities, which do include go-to-market and business development strategies, outbound communication and evangelism, local product launch, field and partner enablement, and also customer partnership and experience activities, which can really often involve diving deep with large and strategic customers to really fully understand their business drivers and sometimes pain points, removing blockers, and really helping them adopt AWS container services and modern applications at scale.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, it's great to have you both here today. Now, before we dive into our very first topic, I wanted to just highlight, we actually ran a poll over the last week on Twitter with regard to the core focus of today's event. And I just want to share some of the data because it sets a lot of the context of what we're going to be covering over the next 30, 35 minutes in the panel discussion with both of you. We asked the question, what would speed up your adoption of AWS Elastic Container Service if you could get help to address it? The number one thing that jumped out, 47% of people said staff skills and expertise. And this, I guess, is something we're seeing across the board. All organizations are saying that they want to focus on their core business and that containers are something they don't have a lot of experience with. They get the concepts, they see the business benefit. They just don't necessarily have a team of people there sitting doing nothing but focusing on containers. The number two thing was automation and scaling. And I think this leads to more of the operational topic when I talk about, and that is that a lot of organizations are saying they want better automation of not just the deployment, but scaling up and down, and some of the break, fix, or upgrades, patches, fix. They don't want any outages, and they see that as being one of the things that containers can help them with. The number three thing, and it's a consistent element yet again, was operational costs. The shift to an operational status as well, and good from the technology aspect, but then people want to really have a lot of control over the cost elements. And similarly, this is the number three thing that stood out from our poll. Resource utilization was the fourth one. It got 7% of people's attention, but that's something we'll be talking about when we get to our third topic today, because I think it's still just as critical. Obviously, it doesn't have a hit in the pocket as far as costs go, but I think performance impact sometimes is something that needs to be considered. When we do move to a containerized environment, there are a number of things that we should be getting as technology benefits that indirectly benefit the business, such as higher uptimes and so forth. So let's just jump in for both of you now around the first topic I want to talk about, which is a combination of the business challenge that we face when we think about containers and enterprise environments, and then the business opportunities that it presents, and specifically how and where to apply them for enterprise solutions, whether you choose to, if you're building your own tools and systems from a DevOps point of view internally, or whether you're implementing a solution from a third party that's already packaged that way, and specifically where businesses can gain value from these containers in their enterprise environment. So Harris, I wonder if I could bring you back off and kick us off with, in your role as the enterprise sales director for the hybrid cloud practice throughout APAC at HPE, you are literally talking to businesses every day about the benefits around containerized solutions. You're talking about the cost benefits, the performance benefits, uptime, security. I wonder if you could just kick us off with a brief view from the business opportunity point of view of how containers are helping organizations derive value faster.
Yeah, absolutely, Des. Well, I like to explain containers as having a major impact in the following areas. So the first one is this trend around app modernization, right? Containers, in my view, are one of many essential tools to help organizations transform their applications so that they can take advantage of the power and scale of modern cloud platforms like AWS, right? So if we look at that application market, approximately a third of all applications today were developed recently. They're cloud native, they can scale, they can do all these amazing things because they were built to do that. But the other 2/3 are legacy applications, which were engineered before the cloud even really existed and before people, developed applications to take advantage of, essentially limitless scale. And so, that's the challenge for organizations to modernize those apps. There's a common phrase that people say now that every company is a software company. And that doesn't mean that every company cares about writing software. They have a core business, as you mentioned earlier, Des. But ultimately, when you dig down, the core of that company is run by one or more critical apps. And very often that application is very old. It was delivered many decades ago, and it is essential for that business, and its existence needs to continue. And so I see containers as a critical tool to allow organizations to accelerate the modernization of that application and to continue their software development and release cycles, right? And really accelerate them as quickly as possible because that determines their competitive advantage. So modernization of apps is really critical. The other area that has been, very popular is this concept of app portability. Right. And this whole conversation started in the era when we started to care about virtualization. Right. What was virtualization all about? It was about enabling portability of apps across hardware platforms. Right. That was the dream. And virtualization succeeded in doing that. But it came at a cost. And the cost was that you had to take the bulky monolithic operating system with you whenever you move that app. And that is, I think that was, the best technology of its time. And as I said, it's given organizations a lot of benefits. Virtualization has really succeeded. But now containerization lets us take that vision forward and really drive it in a much more effective way so that you can separate out that huge operating system, decouple it from the applications and reduce the overhead of those applications and really achieve portability in a fundamental way that we couldn't before. So those are where I think the opportunities for containers really exist in terms of changing business outcomes for customers.
Fantastic. And our next topic, the technology and solution fit, I've got a follow-up question for you with regard to that in the context of hybrid cloud. But Cameron, you literally live and breathe containerized solutions in your role as the region lead for the container services business at Amazon Web Services. Where are you seeing the greatest gains for organizations looking to leverage containers, and particularly with regard to your ECS offering?
Thanks, Des. Look, that's a terrific question. Many of us have heard the phrase software is eating the world. And it really is, in my experience, certainly true that many organizations really are being disrupted by new business models. and new approaches to delivering value to customers. And what we're seeing is, this disruption's being driven by organizations that are able to leverage software as a differentiator to their business. And, it's through making a difference in how they operate and in the kind of customer experience that they're able to provide. More traditional methods of managing software involve, tethering the software's lifecycle closely to the hardware it runs on and managing it in a vertical stack. And this had the effect of creating what I refer to as software snowflakes. These snowflakes have kind of unique hardware and OS requirements. They take extensive testing to patch just for basic new infrastructure, for vulnerabilities. They tend to scale in unique and often indeterminate ways. They're generally costly to run, and they require a lot of human intervention. And so what we find is that this has left many stakeholders and businesses asking these questions again and again that I'm hearing them. Why it takes so long to provision new infrastructure, why we couldn't deliver features faster, why it costs so much to run the infrastructure, and why we couldn't address security concerns more quickly or proactively. And this is really where, that topic that Harris brought up, the application modernization, really enters the picture. It addresses these symptoms, but it really also hits at the root cause, which is, develop a development culture that prevents teams from really doing their best work. Through a modernization initiative, customers are able to better unlock the value in their organizations. You can automate away tedious work and just deliver faster, remove overhead by using consistent tooling and processes to do more than just undifferentiated lifting, keeping the lights on. You can build security into software development processes and operational activities so that it's not bolted on as some sort of an afterthought. And through the adoption of next generation technologies such as containers and container orchestration services such as Amazon ECS, customers are really laying the foundation to modernize their application architectures, and really as well introducing modern development and operations practices.
It's interesting. I love that quote. It's scary to think that Mark Andreessen said that something, I think it was like 9 or 10 years ago now, in his famous quote in the Wall Street Journal interview. That kind of ages some of us, but it just reminds us that a concept so fundamentally straightforward and to the point has been around for some time, but it's still relevant today. With just staying with you for a moment, Cameron, we've talked a little bit about there with the business benefits from traditional enterprise software. Are you seeing any outliers as far as the adoption of your ECS platform, where enterprises are not necessarily just running the traditional business workloads, their database environments, their CRMs, their order management system? With the pandemic, have you seen a greater uptake in non-traditional workloads that might have necessarily been run internally in a data center or maybe even a computer in an organization's own premises, where now with the pandemic, they haven't necessarily been able to be in the office, or they haven't necessarily been able to spend a lot of time in their data centers due to lockdowns last year? Have you seen the uptake of increased use in ECS, particularly on your AWS platform, with containerized solutions where they're in non-traditional workloads? They might be supply chain related, where organizations had to spin up an e-commerce capability quickly, or transport logistics had to scale, not necessarily because of Christmas, but just the boom in the pandemic uptake. People were buying treadmills like crazy, or they're buying clothing online more than they might have usual. Have there been some outliers that you've seen there where those business benefits being realized very quickly, where they might not have been obvious enterprise solutions in the old sense pre-pandemic?
It's really interesting. Not so much as any outliers, but more of an acceleration in the broader uptake. I think organizations and IT departments are starting to understand the power of the level of abstraction that the containers provide. And so what we're seeing is containers is becoming the new analogy, or the next version of the virtual machine. It's starting to become the default platform for delivering software. ECS is very, very amenable to customers getting up and running quickly with containers. So as organizations are pivoting to the cloud, particularly as a result of economic conditions and the pandemic, we're finding that the adoption of ECS and Fargate, particularly the serverless container model, is really sort of reducing the amount of friction for customers to bring all classes of workloads across to AWS.
Fantastic. Well, gents, I'd love to know, in the context of what you've both just shared there, just look a little more tightly at the technology and solution fit of containers in an enterprise environment. One of the big things that keeps coming up at board level for me on a weekly basis almost is this question of how and where to incorporate containers in a normal business. And you know, we talked briefly about the business benefits, but often the technology fit isn't obvious. And a lot of CIOs are struggling to kind of draw a line between and what, you know, what they might have done in, as you said, a VM, Cameron, versus maybe a container, not realizing that there shouldn't be a blurring or line between them. There should be a very seamless integration between them. And some stuff will need a virtual machine still, and other software is already refactored or redesigned or built from scratch to run natively in containers for all those reasons you've talked about. I wonder if I could maybe stay with you on that basis, Cameron, when you know, would you better walk us through maybe a 30,000-foot view of what, firstly, the AWS ECS technology is and where organizations should be looking to AWS's ECS as the right technology and the right solution fit for the containerized business logic applications, and then we'll come back to something a little more deep around that topic.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks, Des. I think I should quickly lead out here by mentioning a couple of points just for context before I unpack that. And so when we're reasoning about containers and the associated use cases and benefits, there are actually two major components that are at play there, and they do work together in concert. There's the deployable application artifact, you know, packaged as the container image, and then there's the services that we can use to actually manage containers at runtime on AWS, and these are the container orchestration services themselves. The choice of the container orchestrator is a really important one for customers. You know, this is going to be a key integration point, and it really will deeply influence the rest of the choices that the customers are going to make. From the 30,000-foot perspective, ECS is a fully managed container orchestration service. And so it comes with the advantage of actually having AWS configuration and operational best practices really built in. With ECS, there's no control plane or things like add-ons for you to manage, and it does natively integrate both with AWS and third-party tools to make it really easy for teams to focus on building applications and not really spending time on operating the environment. But to that point, what customers tell us they really love about ECS is the simplicity that it provides. So it's that powerful simplicity of ECS that enables customers to grow from, you know, a single Docker container all the way to managing the entire enterprise application portfolio. You're able to run and scale your container workloads across availability zones in the cloud and actually on premises, again, without that complexity of managing a control plane or even compute nodes if you choose a serverless deployment model with Fargate. ECS as a container orchestration service actually underpins, you know, a very wide range of customer applications and use cases, you know, and this includes things like web applications, data processing workloads, machine learning, huge use case, mobile apps, of course, a lot of gaming platforms, and also a whole range of IoT and edge workloads. So it's a really versatile and very scalable platform for organizations to bank on. You might also be interested to know that ECS actually powers a growing number of popular AWS services as well. So AWS ourselves are actually a very happy ECS customer.
I like that. Nothing better than eating your own dog food.
Absolutely.
I think that, you know, AWS has been a testament to the Amazon business model for a long time, given that your number one customer is probably yourself on the online retail sort of things. And if that never goes down, I'm pretty sure my business logic's not going to go down. But you touched on a couple of very interesting things there with regard to the scalability, whether it's planned scalability, maybe it's Mother's Day sales or Christmas sales, or maybe it's slightly less planned where it's ticker type sales where I'm trying to get online for the 8 minutes I can get a Taylor Swift ticket. That's something that not many organizations can cope with. And even if they are in that space, they're often caught unawares of the speed at which today's consumers on mobile devices want to hit click and order things. And particularly now things are all virtual online. The other thing that you mentioned that I really wanted to touch on there just quickly was the managed element. I think a lot of people should invest a lot of time after today's event to spend some time on your website, and we'll have the URL in the description below later, to just learn about some of the managed capabilities that comes with it, and that is that you can focus on your core business again and deploying the software you want to use without having to have all the other expertise around it, whether it's the security front end or the back end storage or the monitoring. And I think that's something that Harris can probably help us detail a bit more soon. But Harris, to bring you back in, when we think about the technology and solution fit idea, in my mind, it's often a make or break issues for business initiatives. I wonder if you could sort of share some insight in how HP APAC is answering the call with the AWS ECS solution as far as a right fit technology goes for businesses that you work with.
That's a great question, Des. So, I think this is the part of the job that I really enjoy, being in services. And that is, every customer is a little bit different, right? They all start from different places. They all come into the mix with a different level of technical maturity and technical understanding. And, for anything to happen in an enterprise, you've got to have a business case. We'll talk about that. I think, that's how things get done. But depending on the industry and on the customer and what they're trying to achieve, there's always variations. There's always a little bit different. So I love the fact that, with our partnership with AWS, we have such a powerful platform and a set of options that we can apply to help all of our customers. But in terms of how we tailor the approach, which I think is really the key thing, what I always recommend to customers, if they don't know how to get started, if they're not sure where the value of containers is for their organization, we have an engagement that we call a container suitability assessment. And that's really to help our customers build a roadmap that they can be confident is both relevant for them, not some cookie cutter generic thing, but it's specifically tailored to them, but that they can also know that it's achievable because we've used this methodology across thousands of clients, over a good number of years, and they've all been very successful. And so I think that's really key is, tailoring that approach, taking a phenomenal technology platform, but tailoring the approach to the unique needs of that customer.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously you tailor it to each solution, but you've got a framework, you've got a methodology that is repeatable and scalable. Just to stick with you for a moment there, Harris, walk us through, when you were just talking about that offering, walk us through what that journey actually is for the average customer who comes to you and says, I have an enterprise environment, I need to now move into a container solution. It comes containerized, it's already pre-packaged that way. It's expecting us to have the capacity to run a container solution. We don't have that. What are the 2 or 3 key steps you've taken through with that methodology as to the, I guess, initial discovery and look at the requirements, then some trials and deployments, and actually go into operational status? What are the key steps of that methodology you bring, even though you do tailor it for every business, obviously, it's a framework that's repeatable?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as I said, every customer starts from a different point. I'd say the big differentiator here, let's take a number of customers we deal with. Some will say, hey, we already have workloads in AWS. We already have an environment, or we call it a landing zone, right? But we haven't implemented any container workloads yet. So, for some customers, it's about modifying and adapting their landing zone to get it ready to receive a containerized workload, okay? And our methodology, which we call minimum viable cloud, or MVC, is all about focusing on the features and the capabilities that are necessary for that workload, as opposed to trying to build something for every conceivable scenario that you might face in the future. I see some customers trying to take that approach, and that's a very much kind of a legacy on-prem approach, like, well, we get one shot at budget and we get one shot to buy the hardware, and that's all we get, right? The cloud gives you far more flexibility, so we always take a much more agile approach. So some customers already have AWS, many do, and it's about layering in containers. Some of our customers, this would be the first workload that they would adopt. They've not used public cloud before. There still are quite a few customers out there. And so there we kind of start from the basic principles around, okay, what's your, we can help you build a strategy. We can help you build a roadmap. We can assess the workloads that we want to put in AWS, what the needs are around containerization. We can build that environment. We can, do a proof of concept if necessary. Then we can do a full scale migration and then move it into operations. So, again, follow the same methodology for every customer, but some customers are more mature than others, and we try to tailor our approach so that we're not giving them more that they need, but we also don't want them to just deploy things and hope they're going to work. We try to cover off all the foundational principles like security, governance, compliance, and things that are essential for them to run mission critical applications.
Fantastic. No, I think it's critical for organizations to speak to both yourselves at HP and AWS as early as possible for that very journey, because if it isn't their core business, then there's going to be gaps because their expertise or experience isn't sufficient to know all the things that they should know, the Dolan Rumsfelds, as it were. Let's talk about the journey from trials to deployment and then to full operational status. Cameron, I'd like to bring you back in a moment. When we think about this overall journey, this where to get started with the containers, who can help our organizations achieve successful outcomes, and what those key sort of stages or milestones or phases or whatever you want to call them might be, from realizing what a requirement, either internally developed or an external third-party app solution, to actually getting it running on a day-to-day basis, cost effectively, online 24/7 and scaling up and down. Cameron, what's a typical customer journey for organizations that you work with as they transition from container solutions and trial deployments to actually prove that the use case works for them, irrespective of whether container is the right technology, through to full operational status where they're on AWS ECS and it's running day to day, and in essence, in many ways, a managed offering with your platform. What are those key stages they go through? What does a normal customer journey look like as far as the AWS ECS transition goes from trials deployment through to operational status look like in your experience?
So it's a big topic to unpack, and thank you for asking it. I'd say I'd qualify the answer with, there's definitely an element of it depends baked into the response, and that's due to a number of reasons. Probably first and foremost is simply that ECS is able to cater to a really wide variety of customers. And these customers each are coming to the containerization journey with different requirements in terms of things like the type of workload to be managed, the number, the size, and the complexity of the applications to be managed, and also the order of scale that the deployments will need to meet. The other important element that I'd call out, and this is what Harris touched on as well, is we just need to consider the knowledge and tooling that an organization already has available. Organizations are each getting started from different places. But having said that, what's typically common across our customers is the implementation of a backbone, and something like a continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline. These pipelines are comprised of a series of steps that are performed in order to deliver a new version of software, basically, from the code release in a source control repository through build, test, deploy, and then operational or monitoring phases. And so for organizations that are just getting started, they typically don't have a lot of these things. We recommend, they take a look at some of the great tooling, and they invest some time looking at something like AWS Copilot. This is essentially a command line tool that enables customers to quickly launch and easily manage containerized applications on Amazon ECS and AWS Fargate if they choose. So, with Copilot, they don't need to install and leverage multiple tools, configure a step-by-step deployment pipeline or create a bunch of AWS resources and stitch them together. This single tool creates the step-by-step pipeline on their behalf, creates the resources, and guides them in deploying containerized applications to the cloud. It includes actually built-in examples for common application architecture patterns, and provides, to some degree, guided experiences to help customers deploy very quickly. So, it's certainly the perfect entry point for building, managing, and running containers on ECS and with Fargate again, if that's a choice. But I would, and this actually harkens back to a point that Harris raised also, I would mention that, whilst we've made it really simple to get up and running, some would arguably say deceptively simple, ultimately knowledge and training are very much on the critical path to success. So we do then provide a bevy of great resources at the ECS web homepage for customers, really at all levels of maturity to get started. We have videos explaining core concepts. We have comprehensive step-by-step guides and reference architectures for deployment scenarios, including things like batch processing or microservices architectures, CI/CD pipelines, and so on, for customers that really want to self-serve. But of course, we do have many customers that choose to work with our fantastic network of consulting partners who can just come in and really hit the ground running to get customers from zero to production in a proven and really effective or fail-safe fashion.
Fantastic. Yes. Well, yeah. And I should just reiterate that, out of the 6,300 odd senior executives who responded to our Twitter poll last week, we mentioned that 47% or so said that they were concerned about their internal skills and experience. But the second point you just talked about there with regard to potentially, let's call it the simplicity or the ease at which it could be deployed. The automation element was 29% of what people were concerned about, how easy it was to automate from deployment through to operational status. And I think you touched on a very interesting point there with regard to the updates and upgrades. And that is that I think one of the biggest benefits that containers offer more than anything is the whole DevOps pipeline, that you can at any time either apply an update or a patch or a fix or a security hot fix or whatever the case may be, or just an upgrade. That, from a consumer's point of view at the front end, clicking a website or using a mobile app, or maybe real-time IoT sensors pulling data out of things and logging it, the environment's just there 24/7, but you're doing all these things behind it mechanically. And I think this is where ECS provides a world-leading capability, because it's there, it's managed. I don't have the skills. So there's two things that you just talked about there more than anything around just the skill sets and the automation capability are the two biggest things that 6,300 senior executives told us last week that they're concerned about. So it speaks directly to the points that you were highlighting there. Thank you. Harris, I wonder if I could bring you back here. One of the things I'd love to get some insights from you. I mean, you've got this amazing lens across the APAC region with your role there at HPE, heading up the entire practice. How are organizations that you work with successfully navigating the journey from this initial trials and test deployments of containers and enterprise container solutions in particularly, through to the full, go live, full operational production state with containers on the AWS ECS platform? What are some of the things that you're seeing, those key steps that they're going through, and how is your organization helping them with that?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question, Des. As I mentioned before, we have a standard methodology that we've used over many, many years to help customers succeed. And, as I like to explain to customers, we're not saying there's only one right way to do this. There may be many right ways, but because we've done this for many, many years, we have a methodology that we know works. And we also have a lot of customer stories where we've gotten involved after the fact where perhaps things didn't work. So we have some learning, some success and failure patterns from that. And that's how we've come up with our methodology. At the same time, at the end of the day, these are customers' environments, and we have to respect the fact that ultimately they're accountable for it. Some customers will want to work with us and follow our methodology from start to finish, and we can help them, throughout that journey. And I love that. And others sometimes will say, look, we have this under control. We're going to do it ourselves, but we might need a little bit of help along the way. So, as a services organization, I always think about how we can break down our methodology into bite-sized chunks that a customer can consume so that they can pick and choose and kind of have an a la carte. So we can say to them, we recommend you do all these things, but if you're not going to do that, at least we can try to help you in different ways, pieces. So I'll kind of talk through some of the big rocks that customers have to think through, right? So first, as I mentioned before, they need to have a clear strategy. I see this as a huge problem. A lot of organizations don't have a strategy other than we want to do something with containers, and we'll say, okay, great, let's flesh that out a bit more. And then once we have that strategy, then where do we go? Well, for an organization that wants to do more themselves, we have a training and enablement program. Containers are a new skill set. They require a new way of operating to take advantage of them. What I always tell the customers is, if you're going to go it alone, if you're going to do it yourself, make sure you invest in a really good organizational training program to make sure that you can reap the benefits, right? So training is critically important, and we have a model of enable your people so that they can be successful. That's critically important. So once you've done that, then the next thing is you have to go from that strategy to a detailed plan. And that means doing an analysis of the organizational's workloads and determining which ones are good candidates to be containerized, okay? I see a lot of customers saying, well, let's just containerize everything. And I'll say, well, you can, but do you want to invest in something if there isn't a clear benefit? Some organizations are very pragmatic, and others just say, let's just containerize the whole lot because it's easier. Okay, I may disagree with that, but we see customers doing that as well. Then, as I mentioned, we need a landing zone. If you don't already have one in AWS, we can help you build one. That's really important before we do anything. Then we need to migrate. If you are going to, migrate a large number of workloads into AWS, you don't want to do that manually. It's nothing to do with AWS. It's just about efficiency. And we help customers create what we call a migration operations center, where automations are all scripted and automated, and you can spend the same amount of effort, right, migrating one application as you can do for thousands of applications. So setting up that automation for those large scale engagements is really important. And then finally, once you're migrated into AWS and you're up and running with containers, we want to help organizations operate them better. And we have a full managed service that we provide for customers who don't want to run it themselves. Or again, we have training and enablement to help a customer run the environment on their own. So regardless of that outcome, those are the different ways that we can help our customers.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, there's something that really jumped out at me. We've spent the last couple of decades with automation in some form, whether it's a physical build of a machine that one day we might have put a live CD in the thing and push the power button. It would just build itself straight from the CD and install the operating system and the basic software. Now we're at the far end of the spectrum where the stuff is automated through scripts and tools, and certainly things like Copilot from AWS. And in a lot of people's minds, when I talk to them, there's sort of this barrier in their mind where they're like, oh, we used to automate stuff in hardware. Then some magic happened in the data center when we outsourced it to a third party to manage the infrastructure. Now it's coming back in-house, and we're not quite sure where we are. And so we walked them through that journey to, I guess, highlight the fact that automation never actually went away. It was just a little more seamlessly integrated. And then when they drew a line from where their skills and experience ended, it was important to fill that gap with partners of choice, such as yourselves at HPE APAC and AWS, to bring in those skills, to bring in the world-leading capability and those frameworks. And I think you've highlighted it very, very well. And a number of questions actually come up in the chat window from folk that I'm going to actually pivot to in a minute in the Q&A section. But thank you for both of you, Cameron and Harris, for that great conversation around those three big challenges around the business benefits and some of the opportunities, where the technology and solution fit makes sense and doesn't sense, and how to approach that. And then the journey into operational status and those natural steps that you would go through. Really appreciate the great conversation there. Let's just jump into the Q&A section now. There's a long list of things. I'm going to try and curate these down to a shortened form and consolidate some. Cameron, there's a couple for you, if I can just start with you now. And folks, while you're on here, thank you so much for sticking us through that great conversation with the panel discussion. Please keep your questions coming through the chat window. We've got a couple of them come in through Twitter as well with the #evolve hashtag. Cameron, a couple of questions around automation and the whole challenge that organizations face with what might have been legacy automation to now cloud automation, and certainly the orchestration and deployment of containerized solutions, be it in-house developed or third-party solutions they purchased. I wonder if you could touch on where the opportunity for orchestration resides within the particular technology domain that AWS ECS brings. There's about 3 questions that relate to that. So thank you everyone for your questions. I hope you don't mind that I've consolidated in the interest of time. Automation, where does it reside? And talk us through that whole technology domain. Where are the opportunities to benefit from that, Cameron?
Terrific. Fantastic topic. Automation is definitely very important. And it's certainly tightly coupled with, the ability for organizations to realize the benefits such as total cost of ownership savings. So really a key point to unpack here. Within the particular technology, the domain that we've been discussing today, there's a number of moving parts, and each of which can potentially provide organizations with significant benefits, particularly as each of those elements or components relate to automation. Starting with ECS being the focal point of today's discussion, the container orchestrator actually is an automation technology that's in the business of automating the deployment, the management, the scaling, and the networking of containers. By containerizing the applications and adopting a container orchestrator such as ECS, you are automating away a large amount of operational toil. So this is a great place to start. And for teams that are new to this space, then, again, go to a tool like Copilot. It'll enable you to get up and running very quickly. It very much accelerates your journey to end-to-end automation. But for organizations that are coming to containers on the cloud from a place of greater maturity or experience, I definitely suggest adopting a holistic approach to automation. And in particular, by implementing a practice of managing all resources and environments on the cloud as code by way of what's referenced as managing infrastructure as code. By managing your servers, your databases, your networks, all of the things in the same fashion as software, organizations can automate the end-to-end lifecycle of the full technology stack, and that's in a really repeatable, consistent manner. There's a number of really great and established tools that provide frameworks for managing infrastructure as code, including things like the AWS CDK, HashiCorp Terraform and tools like Pulumi. So I definitely recommend starting there. Yeah.
Fantastic. Harris, we have two attendees today who are actually privately pinged me that are in CIO roles, one for a fairly large organization in the financial services sector. I'm going to consolidate their three questions that the two of them put forward, which specifically relate to something you spoke about a little earlier. So I wonder if you could provide just a little more context and detail around it, which was the challenge of when and where to stop and develop that strategy you spoke about with regard to your approach to containers and containerized solutions and adopting containers when it makes the most technical and business sense. But also you spoke about having a very clear roadmap and I guess a clear business case. And specifically some of the key pitfalls of taking different directions of running at containers and thinking that the next best thing and just trying them versus having a proper business case around it and a need. I wonder if we can consolidate all of that into sort of just, what are some of the key pitfalls that organizations should be aware of, and what are the key things you think that people need to be approaching as a CIO in particular in this case? And thank you both for the question, as to building out their business case, building out a roadmap and a strategy, as opposed to just going all in and hoping it's going to be the right solution.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think this has been the theme of the last 12 months when it comes to containers and customer conversations. They're oftentimes thinking about, hey, let's build a platform. Let's get, containers up and running. And I'll go, great. What are we going to achieve here? And, what are our success metrics, and, where should we focus? And a lot of times that's not clear to them because they haven't really thought that piece through, right? They're taking sort of an approach of saying, let's build it, and then we'll make it available to business, and then they'll use it, right? It's kind of a field of dreams. If you build it, they will come kind of approach. So I hear that a lot, which isn't great. I think that's kind of backwards, right? And I think some of that is because there's a lot of hype and buzz and a lot of excitement around containers. So people sort of have this feeling like we need to do something. We need to have an offering as well because that's what our competitors are doing. So we need to try to do the same thing or something similar, right? And I think they're deploying tech for the sake of the tech, right? And they haven't thought at all about the people that are impacted by that. I made the point around training and change management, and also, the operational processes that surround that. And I use this story from one of my colleagues. If you have a 14-step business process that takes 10 days to complete before you can release any software, right? And you move that to AWS and you containerize it, you have the exact same slow, broken process. You haven't improved anything, right? So if you know what your goals are, so for example, if your organizational goal is, I want to be able to develop and release software faster, and I think containers are an enabler for that, that's absolutely right. But you can't just focus on the container tech to enable that. You have to change the way that everyone works. And that's not always easy, but it's necessary, right? And I think I always challenge IT people when we have these conversations to think about the business that they're there to support, right? Who's their customer? It's the business. The business doesn't come to IT and say, I need to containerize my app. If anything, if you tell them you're going to do something different about their app, that usually makes them nervous. They're like, you're going to change something? I don't want you to do that. If you ask them a question, do you want to containerize your app? They're going to go, I don't understand that, but no, right? That's not what drives them, right? They don't necessarily understand containers. They don't really even care, right? They care about the outcome, right? Is it going to make my app more available, right? More resilient, more secure? Is it going to allow me to release software faster? Is it going to allow me to put more great features in the hands of my customers? Those are the things that the business cares about. So if you want to be successful internally as an evangelist for containers, you have to be able to tie the benefits of containers back to those business initiatives, right? So that's kind of one point that I make. And another point that I make is, don't get sucked into the marketing hype. There's a lot of, unscrupulous vendors out there who just say, it's easy. You can be up and running in minutes. And that's true. We spoke about that, but they're not telling you the other side of the story, right? And so, I think no matter how easy the technology is, it has to be planned, right? And I always say, if you want to maximize your chance of success, follow a proven approach that's led to successful outcomes for other customers. Don't just make it up as you go, right? If you have a good plan and you follow through on that, nothing's a guarantee, but it's very, very likely that you'll succeed.
Yes, reminds me of that line, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Now we are come up on the hour. I've got one quick wrap up because we have a lot of questions which we will respond to via follow-up emails. But Cameron, if you could just wrap us up in 60 seconds. There's a couple of questions that come in from half a dozen people just around the capability of ECS to cope with a hybrid environment. And I'm sure the answer is yes, but if you could just wrap us up very briefly. Amazon Web Services ECS offering, just tell us about its capability with regard to hybrid cloud environments and hybrid container environments. I'm sure the answer is yes, but just briefly walk us through in a minute or two, if you could, before we wrap up, on the capability you have to integrate with container solutions that may be run on premises or in a data center somewhere, to either bursting in the cloud or running seamlessly as just another part of the infrastructure.
Fantastic, Des. Yeah, certainly interesting times that we live in now as a cloud vendor to be reasoning about and articulating, running AWS workloads off region. Certainly ECS was conceived or born on the cloud, and that's where we've developed and hardened the technology. But as we have grown as an organization and introduced, firstly, our AWS Outposts product, which is effectively, taking a slice of an AWS region and providing that as, a rack of equipment that can run in a customer's data center or edge location, wherever they choose, on the Outposts rack on-prem at the customer's chosen location. You can run a range of AWS managed services. From straight up, compute and storage, all the way through ECS or EKS's containers. So one way to run and consume ECS off region or on, in a hybrid scenario is on AWS Outposts. And actually, during last year, we released another mechanism by which you can schedule ECS containers literally anywhere. So on your own hardware, whatever that might be and wherever it might be. And that's a feature we call ECS Anywhere. And with ECS Anywhere, effectively what we do is we still run the control plane. We run the ECS service on the cloud. And then you have the ability to bring your own compute, whether that's servers in your data center, a Raspberry Pi, an IoT device on the factory floor. You can install an ECS agent onto that equipment and have the ECS control plane on the region, schedule and manage the container lifecycle of containers running on your equipment basically anywhere. So we have those three primary options: the on-region, the on-customer premise on Outposts as a kind of a managed service, and then on customers' own equipment with ECS Anywhere. So a lot of great
Fantastic.
Hybrid use cases available.
Literally end to end in every possible sense of it. Well, thank you very much for that. Cameron, Harris, has been absolutely fantastic. We are at the an hour now, so we'll wrap up there. Gentlemen, it's been fantastic to have the hour with you both. Cameron Sinnes, who's joined us from Melbourne today, the region lead for Container Services Business Unit at Amazon Web Services. Cameron, it's been great to see and have you on today. Really appreciate it. We'll look forward to having you on again soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much. It's been a
Harris Schneiderman, again, joining us from Melbourne, Enterprise Sales Director for the Hybrid Cloud Practice for HPE APAC. Harris, always great to see you. And thanks again for another hour of power as it is. And we'll look forward to the next event with you as well.
Oh, thanks a lot, Des. It's been a great session today.
Huge thank you to HPE APAC and AWS for sponsoring today's event. And thank you everyone who was able to join. If you are watching through a replay, thank you so much for registering and watching the replay. We would love you to share it with your colleagues at work or your associates and peers. And continue the conversation via the HPE Evolve hashtag, either HPE Evolve or just Evolve, and we will track and trace it. And we will get back to you with all the answers to your questions you posed, the ones we weren't able to cover in the hour. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll look forward to seeing you in the next event. I'm Des Blanchfield. It's been an absolute pleasure to spend an hour with you. Stay safe, and we will see you again soon.